So I think, the fate had it that I should really be here and talk about this book today, A Life at Noon. What you see on the screen is a cover of the first English version of the book. This was published in Kazakhstan in the middle of 2018, I think, right? And I'll tell you a little bit about the story of how the translation came about. So Tалтус, the author, best known as a musician and a scholar, but he also wrote his life story, a fictionalized version of his life story called Tалтус in Kazakh, which we translated as A Life at Noon. We could have picked the word noon in English, but it seemed kind of bland to me. And we could have picked high noon, which is sort of like maybe a little bit more what Tалтус might mean. But high noon reminds me of Westerns, and this isn't a Western story, so we have a life at noon. Anyway, so this book on the screen is one of, I think, the book was translated into 6 languages in a big hurry in Kazakhstan. So Zira Naurizbaeva, the widow of Tallus Kulov, suddenly won a grant from the National Academic Library, I think. And Rashan is going to correct me if I make a mistake about this. The National Academic Library of Kazakhstan suddenly had money to translate this book into not just English, but into 6 different languages, the UNESCO World Culture Languages. So one of those would be Russian, because it only existed in Kazakh at first. And then from Russian, we were going to translate it into Chinese, Arabic, Spanish, French, I think, and English. So this meant that all this translation had to happen at once. The deadline was tight. So Zira was quickly translating everything she hadn't already translated from Kazakh into Russian. Her editor, Lilia Klaus, who's another wonderful writer in Kazakhstan, was helping her check her work and edit and polish it in Russian. And as they finished parts of it in Russian, they shipped it off to us translators in different parts of the world, and we started our translation into our respective languages. So I was working into English from Zira's Russian translation, and she also sent me the Kazakh manuscript. So I don't speak Kazakh. I should tell you right away. I translate from Russian and from Uzbek. So Uzbek is another Turkic Central Asian language. It's very similar to Kazakh, but it's not the same. And I've never spent a lot of time looking at Kazakh texts before. But I found that when I did, I could recognize enough of the grammar and the structures and some of the vocabulary to kind of follow along if I had the Russian text to help me out. So my translation is from the Russian and the Kazakh, but mostly the Russian, to be perfectly honest. Let's see. So this book came out here in Kazakhstan. I've never seen an actual copy of this book, but several months later, I was able to submit my translation to Slavica Press, which is at the University of Indiana, and they immediately accepted it for publication, and they came out with this US edition of the book called A Life at Noon, and that's the one that we have for sale over here. I'm going to talk for a while about the translation and read you some passages from the book that are my favorite. Then we're going to have a short break where we invite you to have more refreshments and buy books if you want. And then we're going to turn the floor over to Rashan, who's going to tell you more about Tallus Kulov himself and the music and how that relates to the book. If I sit down, can you still see me? Yeah, is that okay? Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a full-time translator from Russian and Uzbek mostly, as I said. But I started working with Central Asian writers a few years ago. So I translated novels by Hamid Ismailov, who's a fairly well-known Uzbek novelist. And then I was started being contacted by Kazakh writers as well. And Zira Naurizbaeva, the widow of Tallus, was one of the first to contact me. So we've published some of her stories in translation online in anthologies. She introduced me to a whole host of other wonderful Kazakh writers, and now I'm working with them too. So I've kind of fallen into this niche now of Central Asian literature, and I love it. It's wonderful, and I'm really glad. This is the first book though of my in my translation to come out from Central Asia. I told you the story of the publishing and the grant that we won to translate the book. I should tell you that I had an editor too, so Zira was translating into Russian with her friend and colleague Lilia Klaus. I was translating it into English, and my friend and colleague Elizabeth Adams, who lives near Seattle, was checking my work as I went too. And this is all because we were in such a big hurry to meet the initial deadline in Kazakhstan. So I owe a lot of thanks to not only to Zira and Lilia, but to Elizabeth. It really took 4 of us to translate this into English through another language on the way. Let's see, I want to tell you a little bit about what surprised and impressed me the most about the book. So I was reading it for the first time as I was translating it. Most translators will tell you that's not the best practice. We like to read the whole book first, kind of let it sink in, form an impression of it, talk about, think about the strategy we want to use to translate the book, but there wasn't time for that in this case. So I'm reading it for the first time and translating right away. So I'm kind of translating it and experiencing it as the reader would experience it as I go through. So that gave me a very kind of visceral experience reading the book. The first big theme in the book that sort of surprised me as I read and as I translated was the most unpleasant part of the book, and that's the violence in it. How many of you in the audience have already read some of it or part of it or all of it? Just many, okay. So I'm gonna try not to give you too many spoilers. There's a lot of violence in this book, and it comes, I think, from the history of Kazakhstan that almost